Please, close your eyes for just a moment. Try to remember the distinct scent of a Greek courtyard in the summer of 1965. Can you smell the intoxicating sweetness of blooming jasmine vines, clinging to a whitewashed wall, mingling with the earthy aroma of roasted coffee simmering over hot sand? Can you hear the distant, melodic plinking of a street barrel piano rolling over the cobblestones, bringing music to the sleepy afternoon neighborhoods? Welcome back to a time when our world was smaller, our hearts were fuller, and our doors were always left unlocked for friends and neighbors. Today, we are taking a deeply emotional journey back to the Greece of the 1960s. We are going to explore 20 unforgettable details of everyday life that shaped our childhoods and defined an entire generation. These are the precious memories we all share, the forgotten rituals of a beautiful era that we left behind. And please, stay with me until the very end, because our final memory, the sacred ritual of the Sunday table, will surely bring a bittersweet tear to your eye. Life in the 1960s possessed a completely different rhythm, a beautiful cadence that modern society has completely forgotten. Time flowed like honey, slowly and sweetly. We lived by the philosophy of doing things gradually, without the frantic rushing that defines the world today. Waiting was never considered a burden or a waste of time. Whether you were waiting for the local baker to pull your Sunday roast from the wood-fired oven, or waiting for a letter from a relative who had emigrated far away, that anticipation was a vital part of our existence. It gave value to the reward. There is a common myth today that because we lacked modern technology, because we had no smartphones or endless television channels, we were somehow emotionally poorer. But the truth is exactly the opposite. Our lives were infinitely richer because our connections were genuine. We looked into each other's eyes, not at screens. We listened to the subtle changes in our neighbors' voices. We shared our meager resources, our sorrows, and our immense joys over a simple cup of coffee. The wealth of the 1960s in Greece was not measured in drachmas, but in the depth of our human connections. And now let us remember the arrival of the neighborhood ice cellar. Close your eyes and imagine a scorching hot July afternoon in the 1960s. The Mediterranean sun is beating down on the dusty streets, and then you hear the familiar booming voice echoing between the houses. It was a time before electric refrigerators were common in every home, making the ice seller not just a vendor, but a true savior of summer days. He would pull up with his wooden cart or small truck, carrying massive, crystal-clear blocks of ice covered in damp burlap sacks and coarse sawdust to keep them from melting. Do you remember the sharp, crunching sound of his heavy iron tongs biting into the frozen block? The sharp metal pick would expertly split the ice, sending tiny, sparkling shards flying into the hot air. We children would rush to gather those cold diamonds from the dirt, letting them melt in our mouths, the taste of sawdust mixing with the pure, freezing water. We would carry our precious block of ice back to the kitchen, wrapping it tightly in old woolen blankets, or placing it carefully into the wooden icebox. That single block dictated our daily lives, keeping the milk sweet and the water beautifully chilled. It was a ritual of survival, but also one of profound joy, teaching us to appreciate the fleeting luxury of a cold drink. Let us take a stroll to the magical open-air summer cinemas. There was nothing quite like the sensory explosion of attending a movie under the vast, starry Greek sky. As you walk through the entrance, the first thing that hit you was the overwhelming, intoxicating scent of honeysuckle and night-blooming jasmine that inevitably draped the surrounding walls. The ground beneath our feet was covered in white gravel that crunched rhythmically with every step we took toward our canvas director chairs. The ritual always included buying a small paper cone of roasted pumpkin seeds, cracking them between our teeth as we waited for the film to start. Then, the projector would whir to life, casting a flickering beam of light through the cigarette smoke that drifted lazily into the night air. We sat completely mesmerized, watching our beloved stars like Aliki Voudouklaki or Dimitris Horn on the silver screen, their voices echoing through the quiet neighborhood. If you lived in the adjacent apartment buildings, you could sit on your balcony and watch the movie for free, providing your own commentary. It was a communal event, a shared emotional journey of laughter and tears, wrapped in the warm embrace of a perfect summer breeze. Do you recall the comforting morning melody of the milkman? Long before dawn broke and the city woke up, the silence of the streets was broken by the rhythmic clip-clop of hooves or the puttering of a small, three-wheeled motorcycle. The milkman arrived carrying large, heavy aluminium cans that clinked musically against each other. Mothers and grandmothers would step out of their front doors, holding their own empty metal pitchers, waiting to be served. The milkman would use his special ladles to measure out the raw, unpasteurized sheep or cow's milk, pouring it in a frothy, white cascade. The smell of that fresh milk was incredibly rich and earthy, but the ritual did not end at the door. That milk had to be immediately carried to the kitchen and boiled on the stove to make it safe for drinking. The whole house would fill with the warm, comforting scent of boiling milk. We would stand by the stove, watching carefully so it would not boil over, a disaster every child dreaded. And the ultimate prize was the thick, creamy skin that formed on the top as it cooled. Some children hated it, but for others, sprinkled with a little bit of sugar, it was the absolute best part of waking up in the morning. Let us step inside the traditional neighborhood coffee house. This was the undisputed domain of the older men, a sacred sanctuary of smoke, strong coffee, and loud political debates. As you walked past the open doors, the unmistakable sound of backgammon pieces slamming aggressively against the wooden board filled the air. It was a constant, rhythmic clattering, accompanied by the gentle clicking of amber worry beads passing through rough, calloused fingers. But the true heart of this place was the incredible aroma of the coffee being brewed slowly in hot sand. The proprietor would place the small brass pot deep into the searingly hot, fine sand, turning it gently. This slow brewing process extracted every ounce of flavor, creating a thick, dark, and intensely aromatic cup of coffee. The most critical part was the rich, creamy foam on top, a sign of true respect to the customer. Men would sit for hours at those small, wobbly marble tables, nursing a single tiny cup of coffee and a glass of cold water, discussing the news, sharing their worries, and finding solace in the company of their peers. It was our original social network, a place where time stood entirely still. Think back to the sweltering summer nights when we slept on the rooftops. In the 1960s, air conditioning was an absolute luxury that practically no one possessed. When July and August brought their relentless heat waves, the concrete houses felt like baking ovens. And so, an unspoken neighborhood agreement took place. As the sun finally set, entire families would drag heavy cotton mattresses, clean white sheets, and light blankets up the narrow stairs to the flat rooftops or out onto the large balconies. We would take a hose or a bucket of water and wash down the hot concrete tiles, enjoying the instant smell of wet dust and the sudden burst of cool air as the water evaporated. Lying on our backs, staring up at a sky completely untouched by light pollution, the stars felt close enough to touch. We could hear the loud, rhythmic song of the cicadas in the nearby pine trees and the hushed, whispering voices of the neighbors on the adjacent rooftops. There was a profound sense of peace and security, falling asleep in the open air, surrounded by the subtle sounds of breathing from your siblings and parents, united by the simple need to find a cool breeze. We can never forget the strict, scratchy reality of our school uniforms. In the 1960s, every single schoolchild in Greece wore the exact same outfit. For the boys, it was often short trousers, and for the girls, the iconic blue smock with the stark white collar. Getting ready for school was a serious daily ritual. Our mothers would tirelessly wash and iron those blue uniforms until they were perfectly crisp, making sure the white collars were perfectly bleached and buttoned tight around our necks. The fabric was often stiff, and in the freezing winter months, we wore thick, incredibly scratchy wool sweaters underneath to keep the chill away. We carried our heavy books in thick leather satchels that smelled strongly of tanned hide and ink. The uniform represented a powerful equalizer. It did not matter if your father was a doctor or a street sweeper. Once you passed through the school gates, you were exactly the same as everyone else. The discipline was strict. The teachers demanded absolute silence. But wearing that blue uniform gave us a deep sense of belonging. We were part of something larger than ourselves, a generation learning discipline and respect within the confines of those blue cotton walls. Let us recall the delicate, beautiful tradition of the spoon sweets. Hospitality in a Greek home during the 1960s was an absolute law, a sacred duty passed down through generations. When a guest unexpectedly knocked on the door, there was no panic, only a graceful routine. The good silver tray was immediately brought out from the glass cabinet. In the center sat small, delicate crystal dishes containing the crown jewel of the Greek pantry. These sweets were made by meticulously preserving seasonal fruits like sour cherries, bitter oranges, baby eggplants, or quinces in a heavy, glistening sugar syrup. The ritual was precise. The guest was offered one tiny, beautifully crafted silver spoon to eat the sweet, followed immediately by a tall glass of ice-cold water. The contrast was incredible. The intense, sugary bite of the fruit, bursting with the concentrated flavors of the Mediterranean sun, washed down with pure, freezing water. It was a gesture of immense respect and love. Women took immense pride in their homemade sweets, trading secrets and comparing the clarity of their syrups. Offering this treat was a way of saying, "You are welcome here. Let me make your day just a little bit sweeter." Can you still hear the melancholic music of the street barrel piano? Before record players and portable radios became commonplace, the music of our neighborhoods was delivered by foot. The musicians would slowly push their heavy, ornate wooden pianos through the dirt and cobblestone streets of the city. These beautiful instruments were completely covered in faded, romantic photographs of beautiful women, old Greek flags, and artificial cloth flowers that had seen better days. As the musician vigorously cranked the heavy iron handle, a torrent of trilling, slightly out of tune, yet incredibly soulful music would pour out, echoing against the walls of the houses. The melodies were always a mix of joyous folk dances and deeply heartbreaking songs of lost love. Women would lean over their iron balconies, wiping their hands on their aprons to take a small break from cooking. We children would run alongside the cart, entirely mesmerized by the turning mechanical gears. The ultimate sign of appreciation was taking a heavy drachma coin, wrapping it carefully in a small piece of newspaper so it would not roll away, and tossing it down from the balcony onto the street below as a thank you for the beautiful music. Remember the immense, physical labor of washing clothes by hand in the courtyard. In the 1960s, doing the laundry was an all-day event that required staggering physical stamina. Every home had a large galvanized metal tub, usually placed in the center of the courtyard under the shade of a lemon tree. The air would fill with the incredibly pungent, earthy, and perfectly clean scent of green olive oil soap. Women would spend hours bent over the ribbed wooden scrubbing boards, their knuckles red and raw, working the stubborn stains out of heavy cotton sheets and trousers. But this grueling work was rarely done in silence. Across the low courtyard walls, women would shout to their neighbors, sharing the latest gossip, trading recipes, or simply singing old folk songs to pass the time. It was a communal event of shared hardship and solidarity. And then came the reward. Wringing out the heavy fabrics by hand and hanging them on the long clotheslines. There is nothing in the world that smells quite like crisp white cotton sheets, dried in the fierce Mediterranean sun, whipping wildly in the warm afternoon wind. It was the scent of pure, hard-earned cleanliness. Let us drift back to the absolute freedom of playing in the streets until the sun went down. Our childhoods were lived entirely out of doors, in the dusty roads and empty plots of land between the houses. There were no organized playdates, no hovering parents, and very few cars to worry about. We simply stepped outside, shouted for our friends, and let the games begin. We played relentless games of hide and seek, finding the most ingenious hiding spots behind old wooden doors and overgrown bushes. We played intense games of dodgeball, using heavy, scuffed leather balls that stung when they hit you. Our knees were constantly scraped, our hands were perpetually dirty, and our shoes were always covered in a fine layer of white dust. We experienced the pure, physical exhaustion of absolute joy. The only clock we ever obeyed was the sudden flickering on of the yellow street lamps, or the sharp, echoing voice of our mothers calling our names from the kitchen window, signaling that dinner was finally ready. We went to bed with dirty feet and happy hearts, dreaming of the games we would continue the very next day. Do you remember the creamy, tangy perfection of the yogurt seller's wares? Just like the milkman, the yogurt seller was a beloved, regular visitor to our neighborhoods. He was a figure of immense strength and balance. He carried a long, thick wooden pole across his broad shoulders, and suspended from each end were wide, flat wooden trays holding dozens of small, unglazed clay pots. Each pot contained a portion of freshly made, traditionally cultured sheep's milk yogurt. The taste of that yogurt was absolutely nothing like the perfectly smooth, factory-made products we buy in plastic tubs today. It was profoundly thick, wonderfully tangy, and wonderfully imperfect. The absolute best part, the prize that siblings would practically fight over, was the thick, yellowish, wrinkled skin that formed on the very top. You would carefully scoop it up with your spoon, savouring the rich, concentrated flavour. Eating that yogurt from the cool, porous clay pot, perhaps with a heavy spoonful of dark thyme honey drizzled over it, was a simple, profoundly nutritious meal that tasted like the very earth and traditions of Greece. Think of the glowing magic of the jukebox in the corner of the local tavern. Sundays in the 1960s were often spent gathered around a wooden table at a neighbourhood tavern, eating simple food and drinking harsh, golden Retsina wine. But the true centerpiece of the room was always the jukebox. It was a massive, brightly illuminated machine, glowing with neon colors, holding the musical soul of the entire country inside its glass belly. For a single drachma coin, you could command the room. I still remember the heavy, satisfying sound of the coin dropping into the slot, followed by the mechanical whirring of the robotic arm as it selected the small vinyl record and placed it on the turntable. The subtle crackle of the needle hitting the vinyl was the prelude to pure emotion. Suddenly, the powerful, heart-wrenching voice of Stelios Kazantsidis or Grigoris Bithikotsis would fill the smoky room, singing deeply about poverty, migration, and unrequited love. Grown men would silently close their eyes, nodding their heads to the rhythm, entirely lost in the beautiful sorrow of the lyrics. It was our collective therapy, a machine that turned our shared struggles into beautiful, enduring art. Let us pay tribute to the local cobbler, the quiet artist of the neighborhood. In the 1960s, absolutely nothing was ever thrown away carelessly. A pair of leather shoes was a serious financial investment, and when the soles wore out from walking the rough pavements, you did not buy a new pair. Instead, you visited the small, incredibly cluttered shop of the local cobbler. The moment you stepped inside, your senses were overwhelmed by the powerful, intoxicating smells of sharp industrial glue, dark shoe polish, and raw leather. The cobbler sat hunched over his metal anvil, his hands stained black, a few small nails held tightly between his lips. The air was filled with the rapid, rhythmic tapping of his tiny hammer against the leather. He was a master of restoration, able to take a pair of boots that seemed completely destroyed and breathe new life into them. Shoes were patched, resoled, polished, and then passed down from older brother to younger brother. The cobbler taught us the profound value of maintenance and care, proving that things built with quality and treated with respect could last a lifetime. We must remember the sacred Sunday ritual of carrying our food to the neighborhood bakery. While our mothers were exceptional cooks, very few homes had large, reliable ovens capable of perfectly roasting a large family meal. And so, the local bakery, the Fornos, served as the communal kitchen. Early on Sunday morning, mothers would prepare a large, round tin pan filled with a leg of lamb or a chicken, surrounded by wedges of potatoes, generously bathed in olive oil, lemon juice, garlic, and wild mountain oregano. We children were often tasked with carrying this heavy, precarious pan down the street to the baker. The bakery smelled overwhelmingly of fresh yeast and the deep, smoky aroma of burning olive wood. The baker would take our pan, slide it deep into his massive brick oven, alongside dozens of others from the neighborhood. Hours later, we would return to retrieve it. The smell of that perfectly roasted meat and those potatoes, which had absorbed all the rich juices and the slight smokiness of the wood fire, was simply intoxicating. Carrying that piping hot pan back home, trying desperately not to spill the precious juices, was a march of pure, mouth-watering anticipation. Do you remember the sheer, unadulterated awe of the first black and white television sets? In the late 1960s, owning a television was an extreme rarity. It was a massive, heavy piece of wooden furniture that occupied the most prominent corner of the living room. When a family finally managed to buy one, they did not keep it to themselves. It became a communal viewing center for the entire street. I remember dozens of neighbors crowding into a single small living room, sitting on dining chairs, the floor, or leaning against the walls, all staring in complete silence at that small, magical glass box. The owner would carefully adjust the rabbit ear antennas, trying to banish the static snow from the screen. When the blurry black and white image finally stabilized, a collective gasp would fill the room. We watched the rare, limited broadcasts with immense reverence. It felt like a true miracle, a magical window connecting our quiet, dusty neighborhoods to the vast, entirely unknown world outside. The television brought us together physically in those early days, sharing the wonder of modern technology as one big, extended family. Let us step inside the warm, deeply personal space of the local grocery store. Long before massive, soulless supermarkets existed, we had the Bakaliko. Walking inside was a feast for the senses. There were huge burlap sacks rolled down to reveal piles of lentils, chickpeas and beans. There were massive wooden barrels filled with sharp, crumbly feta cheese swimming in salty brine, and smaller barrels filled with shiny black Kalamata olives that the grocer would scoop out with a wooden ladle. But the most important element of the grocery store was not the food, it was the grocer himself. He knew every single family's name, their struggles and their triumphs. Behind his ear, he always kept a stubby wooden pencil, and on the counter rested a small, worn notebook. This notebook was the heart of the community's economy. Purchases were written down on credit, trusting entirely that the father of the house would pay the balance at the end of the month when his salary arrived. There were no credit cards, no background checks, only the deep, unshakable bond of mutual trust and human decency that kept the entire neighborhood surviving and functioning together. Think back to the absolute sweetest delight of a hot afternoon, the vanilla submarine treat. When we wanted something sweet, we did not have freezers full of manufactured ice cream. Instead, our mothers would offer us a jupovricio, which translates directly to submarine. The preparation was brilliantly simple, yet utterly perfect. She would take a tall glass and fill it to the brim with incredibly cold water from the refrigerator or the icebox. Then, she would take a regular metal spoon and plunge it deep into a jar of thick, snowy white, intensely sweet paste, flavored with the magical, pine-like resin of Chios mastic or pear vanilla. She would drop that heavy, sticky spoonful straight into the icy water. The ritual was to lift the spoon, take a small, chewy bite of the sweet vanilla paste, and then plunge it back into the water to keep it soft and cold. As you ate, the paste would slowly dissolve, turning the water into a wonderfully sweet, refreshing drink. It was the ultimate, inexpensive summer luxury. It cooled our bodies, satisfied our craving for sugar, and created a lingering memory of sticky fingers and pure childhood satisfaction. Can you still feel the satisfying, heavy weight of the old drachma coins in your pocket? The currency of our childhood was not made of weightless plastic cards or invisible digital numbers. It was made of solid, heavy metal that jingled loudly with every step we took. The silver-colored drachma coins were beautifully crafted, featuring intricate, deeply engraved designs of ancient owls, legendary kings, and important historical figures. Holding a handful of those coins felt significant. It felt like you were holding the true, undeniable weight of your hard work. We children would meticulously save the smaller aluminum coins in tin boxes or ceramic piggy banks. I remember the wonderful, rattling sound they made when you shook the box, trying to guess if you finally had enough to buy a comic book or a bag of roasted chickpeas. When you handed those heavy coins to the shopkeeper, the exchange felt real and meaningful. We understood the absolute value of money because we could feel its density in our palms. The drachma was more than just currency, it was a tangible, noisy, and beautiful piece of our daily existence. We must not forget the elegant, slow-paced ritual of the evening promenade. In the 1960s, the evening walk was not about exercise, it was the absolute center of our social lives. As the harsh sun dipped below the horizon and the air finally cooled, entire families would wash up and dress in their finest, most carefully ironed clothes. We would all walk slowly down to the central village square or along the coastal harbour. It was a beautiful parade of familiar faces. The air smelled strongly of men's cologne, women's floral perfumes, and the sea breeze. Men would nod respectfully to their acquaintances, while women walked arm in arm, quietly observing the subtle changes in the neighborhood dynamics. For the young people, it was the only acceptable way to flirt. Young men would try to catch the eye of a girl as she walked past with her protective parents, exchanging brief, electrifying smiles. There was no destination, no rush to arrive anywhere. The purpose of the walk was simply to see, to be seen, to breathe the cool night air, and to reaffirm our deep, unspoken connections as a unified, living community. And finally, let us honor the most sacred, powerful ritual of all, the Sunday family table. This was not just a meal, it was the absolute anchor of our entire week. By early Sunday afternoon, the long wooden table was set, often outside beneath the dappled shade of a sprawling grapevine. 3 generations of the family would gather around it. The air was thick with the glorious smells of the roasted meat we had finally retrieved from the baker, fresh, crusty bread, and sharp feta cheese drizzled with dark olive oil. The noise was deafening, grandparents telling old stories, men arguing passionately about politics, women laughing loudly, and children running around the legs of the chairs. Glasses of wine were constantly clinked together with loud wishes for good health. We sat there for hours, eating slowly, talking over each other, and simply existing together in complete harmony. It was chaotic, it was loud, and it was entirely beautiful. That table was our ultimate safe haven. It was where we learned who we were, where we belonged, and how deeply we were loved. It was the beating heart of the Greek family in the 1960s. As we open our eyes and return to the present day, it becomes completely clear to us. We do not just miss the heavy drachma coins, the taste of the vanilla submarine, or the scratchy fabric of our blue school uniforms. What we truly, deeply miss is the way time felt back then. We miss the slow, deliberate pace of our days, the undeniable innocence of our youth, and most importantly, we miss the people who used to sit around those loud, crowded Sunday tables who are no longer with us. We miss a time when a simple cup of coffee in the sand or a piece of ice from a wooden cart was enough to make us feel incredibly wealthy. Thank you so much for taking this emotional journey back to the 1960s with me today. If this video brought a warm smile to your face, or perhaps a small tear to your eye, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like so we can continue preserving our beautiful history together. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these 20 memories touched your heart the most? And what precious detail of your own childhood would you add to this list? Please, write your personal stories in the comments below, and let us keep these beautiful memories alive forever.